Exactly 3:03 a.m., my uncle woke up with his mouth full of grave soil. He wasn't paralyzed, and he wasn't dreaming. He was choking on actual cold, heavy dirt that was being shoved down his throat by invisible hands. He clawed the soil out of his mouth, gasping for air, but when he flipped the light switch, his hands were clean. The dirt was gone. My Uncle Robert was a military man, strict, rational, zero tolerance for the supernatural. He told himself it was stress, but the next night it happened again, then again. For 3 weeks, Robert was being suffocated every single night. He lost 30 pounds. He looked like a walking corpse. Desperate to prove he wasn't crazy, he set up a night vision camera. The footage broke him. It showed Robert thrashing on the bed, jaw unhinged, gagging and spitting, while the sheets depressed around him, as if someone was sitting on his chest, forcing handfuls of invisible filth down his throat. He didn't go to a priest. He found a specialist in old world rituals. As soon as the man stepped into Robert's house, he stopped cold, doubled over, and violently vomited on the floor. He wiped his mouth, looked at my uncle with terrified eyes, and said 5 words that still haunt our family.
Someone has fed your name to the earth.
A grave binding ritual. The specialist told him,
You are being digested. If we don't break the seal tonight, you won't wake up tomorrow.
They started the cleansing in the living room. The air turned freezing. The windows rattled in their frames. Suddenly, Robert dropped to his knees, clawing at his throat, but this time, when he coughed, actual dirt spilled from his lips onto the carpet. Wet, smelling of rot and sulfur. A voice that sounded like grinding stones came from the corner of the room. It whispered,
He stole the land. Now the land takes him.
The specialist screamed at the spirit, demanding the location of the anchor. The voice laughed, a dry, cracking sound, and hissed,
The well.
Robert knew exactly where it was, an old property he'd sold years ago. They drove in pitch blackness, breaking onto the land to find the abandoned well. The specialist lowered himself down on a rope. 20 minutes of digging in the dark. Then, a scream.
I have it.
He pulled up a heavy glass jar wrapped in red cloth. Inside was a photo of Robert. His eyes had been scratched out with a needle, and the jar was packed tight with rusted nails and graveyard soil. The pressure inside that jar was crushing my uncle's lungs. The specialist didn't hesitate. He smashed the jar against the stones and lit the contents on fire. As the photo burned, a scream echoed up from the bottom of the well. Not a human scream, but something guttural and fading. Instantly, Robert gasped, filling his lungs with air for the first time in weeks. Robert survived, but here is the part that keeps me awake at night. Years later, when he told me the dates of the haunting, my blood ran cold. During those exact 3 weeks, I was away at boarding school. I remember waking up every morning with grit under my fingernails and the metallic taste of mud in my teeth. I thought I was sleepwalking, but I wasn't. I share his bloodline. I was feeling the overflow of the curse, and it makes me wonder, if they hadn't broken the jar that night, would the earth have taken me next?
The seatbelt alarm was screaming. The dashboard sensor was lit up red, indicating a heavy passenger in the front seat. But when I looked, the seat was completely empty. The driver wasn't fixing it. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, whispering, "Please, not now, not now." It was a rainy Tuesday, 2 a.m. My car was in the shop, so I ordered a rideshare. A 5-star driver named Sam picked me up in a beat-up sedan. As soon as I opened the back door, the smell hit me. It was a thick, suffocating mix of cheap cologne and something burning, like sulfur or rotten eggs. I almost canceled, but I just wanted to get home. Sam turned around. He had a smile that looked painful, like his skin was too tight for his skull. He didn't say hello. He just asked, "Is it just you tonight?" I stared at him. Yeah, just me. He nodded, then slowly turned to the empty passenger seat next to him and whispered, "See? I told you he was alone." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I laughed nervously, but Sam didn't laugh back. He just pulled onto the highway. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the rain hammering against the roof. I was glued to my phone, trying to ignore the vibe. Then, the whispering started again. Sam was looking at the rearview mirror, making eye contact with nothing. "No, I can't," he muttered. "He's just a passenger. Stop looking at him." I leaned forward. "Excuse me." Sam froze. In the mirror, his face was pale, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. He whispered, "Don't look at the front seat. Whatever you do, keep your eyes on your phone." That's when the car lurched. The engine roared, speeding up way over the limit on the wet asphalt. And then, ding, 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 the passenger seatbelt alarm triggered. The sensor wasn't malfunctioning. It was detecting weight. Something heavy had just settled into the seat next to the driver. "Slow down!" I yelled. Sam was shaking his head violently. "I can't! He's angry!" A sound vibrated through the floorboards, not from the engine, but from inside the cabin. A low, guttural growl, deep enough to rattle my teeth. The car swerved hard to the left, like an invisible hand had yanked the wheel. Sam slammed on the brakes in the middle of the road. "Get out!" he screamed. "He wants the car, not you! Go!" I didn't ask questions. I kicked the door open and scrambled out into the mud, sprinting toward the tree line. When I was 50 feet away, I looked back. The car was idling in the rain. Sam was just sitting there, staring straight ahead, defeated. Then, I saw it. The front passenger door slowly creaked open. The car's suspension groaned and sank, tilting heavily to the right, as if something massive was stepping out. But there was nothing there. Just the rain falling on the empty road. Sam slammed the gas and sped off with the door still hanging open, leaving me shivering in the dark. The rideshare company claimed the driver account was deleted 5 minutes after my ride ended. I never found out who Sam was, but I learned my lesson. Now, whenever I get in a car, I sit in the back, and if the seatbelt light for the empty seat ever turns on, I am tucking and rolling out of that moving car.
The backup camera. My car sensors were screaming. The dashboard screen showed solid red bars, indicating an object was less than 6 inches from my bumper. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the driveway was completely empty. It was 2:00 a.m., the kind of rural darkness that feels heavy, like it's pressing against the glass. I was parked at the top of my driveway, surrounded by woods. No streetlights, just me and the hum of the engine. I shifted into reverse to straighten out. That's when the chaos started. Beep, 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 beep. The proximity alarm was deafening in the quiet cabin. I slammed on the brakes, heart jumping into my throat. I assumed I was about to hit a tree or a deer. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing, just gravel and black air. I checked the side mirrors. Clear. Stupid sensors, I muttered, exhaling. I looked back down at the dashboard screen to clear the alert. I stopped breathing. On the screen, bathed in the sickly greenish glow of the night vision camera, was a man. He was standing directly behind the trunk. He was so close that his stomach was pressed against the lens. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He was just standing there staring into the camera, staring right at me. I spun around in my seat, expecting to see him through the back windshield. Nothing. The driveway was empty. I could see the gravel clearly in the red glow of my taillights. There was no one there. I whipped my head back to the screen. He was still there, but he had moved. He was leaning in now. His face filled the entire display. It was a distorted grayscale nightmare. His skin looked wet. His jaw hung open slightly, slack and lifeless, like a puppet with cut strings. This wasn't a glitch. The camera was seeing something my eyes couldn't. My hand hovered over the gear shift. I wanted to drive, but my legs were paralyzed. On the screen, the man raised a hand. His fingers were long, too long. They dragged slowly across the lens. Scritch, scritch. I didn't hear the sound from the speakers. I heard it from the trunk. It was real. Then the car shook. Thump. The suspension groaned. Something heavy had just climbed onto the trunk. The man on the screen was gone. The view was now blocked by a torso in a dirty shirt. He wasn't behind the car anymore. He was crawling toward the roof. I didn't scream. I just slammed the gas. I tore through the grass, tires spinning, throwing gravel everywhere. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't look at the screen. I just drove. I did 80 miles an hour down those winding back roads until I hit the lights of a 24-hour gas station. I sat under the bright fluorescent lights for an hour before I got out. When I finally checked the back of the car, I felt sick. The backup camera lens wasn't just broken. It had been pushed inward. There were prints on the trunk lid, greasy black smears that didn't look like oil or mud. I traded that car in 2 days later. The dealership asked why I was getting rid of a new vehicle. I didn't tell them the truth. I didn't tell them that even after I wiped the trunk clean, the sensors never stopped screaming.
The broken arm. If he hadn't made one tiny reflex mistake, I would be a face on a milk carton right now. He had a cast, a nice smile, and a van, and I fell for almost all of it. It was 11:30 at night in a grocery store parking lot. The lot was massive, poorly lit, and mostly empty. I was loading bags into my trunk, rushing because the silence felt heavy. "Excuse me?" The voice came from right behind my ear. I spun around, keys clutched in my fist. Standing there was a man, maybe 30, clean-shaven and well-dressed. He looked completely harmless, except for his right arm. It was encased in a heavy white plaster cast, cradled in a blue sling against his chest. He looked embarrassed. He gave a nervous little laugh and apologized for startling me. He explained that he had bought a case of water but realized he couldn't lift it into his van with his broken wing. He asked if I could give him a hand. My stomach tightened. Every instinct I had screamed at me to get in my car and lock the doors. But he looked so pathetic standing there. I didn't want to be the paranoid jerk who refused to help an injured man. I pushed the fear down and agreed. He pointed to a white cargo van parked way at the back of the lot, completely shrouded in darkness. We started walking. Every step took us further from the store entrance and deeper into the shadows. He chatted the whole way, trying to be charming. He asked where I lived, what I studied. I gave him nothing but one-word answers, keeping a few feet of distance between us. When we reached the van, I saw the case of water sitting on the asphalt next to the sliding side door. He thanked me, saying I was a lifesaver, and reached into his pocket for his keys with his good left hand. Then, it happened. He fumbled the keys. They slipped out of his fingers and fell toward the pavement. Without thinking, pure reflex took over. His broken right arm shot out of the sling. It moved with the speed of a striking snake. He snatched the keys out of the air before they even hit the ground. He froze. I froze. He looked at the keys in his right hand. Then he looked at me. The charming, embarrassed smile vanished instantly. His face went blank, cold, dead. "Get in the van." His voice was different now. It was deep and commanding. He hit the unlock button and slid the door open. Inside, there were no seats, just a bare metal floor covered in plastic tarps and a roll of duct tape sitting near the wheel well. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I dropped my bags and ran for my life. He didn't limp. He lunged. He swung that heavy plaster cast at me like a club. It grazed my shoulder hard, but I was already sprinting. I ran back to my car, jamming the unlock button on my fob over and over. I dove into the driver's seat and locked the doors just as he reached my window. He slammed his fists against the glass, screaming in pure animal rage. Both of his arms were working perfectly fine now. I peeled out of that lot and didn't stop driving for an hour. I never called the police. I knew they wouldn't find him. He wasn't looking for help, and he wasn't injured. He was hunting. And the scariest part is knowing that the only reason I escaped is because he had good reflexes.
The emergency maintenance. If I hadn't looked up at my ceiling before unlocking the deadbolt, I would have let a killer right into my living room. It was Tuesday, just after midnight. The pounding on my door wasn't a knock. It was a violent, rhythmic hammering that shook the entire frame. I looked through the peephole. A man in a generic gray work shirt was standing there, shifting his weight, sweating, looking absolutely terrified. "Management, open up! We have an emergency!" His voice was cracking with panic. He screamed that the unit above me had a burst pipe. He said water was pouring into the walls, and if I didn't let him in to shut off the main valve, my ceiling was going to collapse. He was convincing. The panic felt real. I reached for the lock, my hand shaking, ready to save my apartment from a flood. I touched the cold metal of the deadbolt. But then, I froze. I looked up. If water was pouring down hard enough to collapse a ceiling, there should be stains, there should be dripping, there should be the sound of rushing water. My ceiling was bone dry. The white paint was perfect. The apartment was dead silent. I looked back through the peephole. The man had stopped panicking. He wasn't looking at the ceiling or the walls. He was staring intensely at the lock, his hand hovering over the handle, waiting for the click. The sweat on his face wasn't from stress. It was from anticipation. "I don't see any water," I said. "Use your master key." The silence on the other side was sudden and heavy. He didn't check his pockets. He didn't argue. His face changed. The panic melted away, replaced by a flat, annoyed glare. "Open the door." It wasn't a request anymore. I shouted that I was calling 911. I expected him to run. He didn't. Instead, I heard a high-pitched mechanical whine. I watched in horror as a silver drill bit punched through the wood of my door, right next to the deadbolt. He wasn't maintenance. He was drilling out my lock. I scrambled backward into the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I could find. I screamed at the top of my lungs that I had a gun and I would shoot him through the door. The drilling stopped instantly. I heard heavy boots sprinting down the hallway, followed by the stairwell door slamming shut. When the real building manager arrived with the police, they confirmed two things. There was no leak in the unit above me, and the man hadn't just come to my door randomly. He had covered the hallway security cameras with black duct tape before he even knocked. He wasn't coming to fix a pipe. He was coming to fix me.
The school mascot got I was the only person in the entire high school. I had locked every door myself. But when I turned off the floor buffer outside the gymnasium, the silence didn't last. I heard a basketball. It was a slow, rhythmic bouncing coming from inside the dark gym. I wasn't scared at first, just annoyed. Teenagers broke in to play scrimmages all the time. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and marched to the double doors, ready to kick them out. I threw the doors open and shouted for everyone to clear out. I expected to hear sneakers squeaking on the hardwood as kids scattered. Instead, I was met with total silence. The gym was pitch black. I flipped the light switch on the wall, but nothing happened. The breakers had been cut. I swept my flashlight beam across the court. It caught a basketball rolling slowly across the center line, coming to a stop near the far bleachers. I moved the light up the rows of seats. Empty, empty, empty. Then the beam hit the top row. I nearly dropped the light. Sitting at the very top of the bleachers, dead center, was a person. They were wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt, but on their head, they were wearing the school mascot helmet. It was a giant grinning bulldog made of fiberglass and plush. The costume was supposed to be locked in a cage in the basement. I yelled at him to take the mask off and leave. The figure didn't speak. It slowly stood up. The oversized, cartoonish dog head bobbed slightly in the darkness. The painted eyes were staring right at me. He didn't laugh. He didn't taunt me. He just raised a hand and pointed a finger at me. Then, without a sound, he vaulted over the top railing of the bleachers. It was a 10-foot drop to the gym floor. He landed with a sickening wet crunch, but he didn't cry out. He didn't stand up either. He dropped to all fours and started sprinting toward me across the court, moving his limbs like an actual dog. I slammed the gym doors shut and barred them with a broom handle. I ran for the exit, triggering the silent alarm on my way out. By the time the police swept the building, the gym was empty. The back emergency exit was propped open, but they found the mascot head sitting in the middle of the basketball court. When they examined it, they found why he hadn't spoken. The inside of the mascot head was lined with layers of thick duct tape and soaked in chloroform. He wasn't wearing it to scare me. He was wearing it to hide what he planned to do to me.
The SD card. I haven't stepped foot in the woods since 2019. I sold my rifle and my truck because of what I found on an SD card while I was sitting 30 feet up a tree. It was a quiet Saturday evening in November. I was in my tree stand waiting for a deer. I had pulled the memory card from a trail camera on my walk-in, and since the woods were dead silent, I popped it into my handheld viewer to pass the time. The card was full, over 3,000 images. I started scrolling. The first few hundred were just black frames. But then, the infrared flash caught something. It wasn't a deer, it was a face. A man was standing inches from the lens, staring directly into it. He was wearing a dirty, oversized hoodie and a cheap plastic masquerade mask with an exaggerated smile. My stomach turned. I kept scrolling. There were hundreds of photos of him. Sometimes he was standing far away, waving. Sometimes he was holding a knife. Then the background changed. The man wasn't in the woods anymore. He was standing on a paved driveway, my driveway. He was leaning against my truck, holding the trail camera, taking a selfie. He had stolen my camera, taken it to my house, and brought it back. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the viewer. I scrolled faster. The next series of photos were inside my house. There was a photo of him standing in my kitchen. There was a photo of him sitting on my couch. Then came the photo that broke me. It was grainy and green, taken in the dark with the infrared flash. It showed a man sleeping in a bed, mouth open, completely unaware. It was me. He had been standing over my bed while I slept, taking pictures with my own trail camera. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out of the woods immediately. I reached for my gear to climb down, but then I froze. I realized I had been viewing the old photos. I hadn't looked at the most recent one, the one taken right before I pulled the card from the camera. I hit the button to view the last image. The timestamp was from 2 minutes ago. The photo showed a man in camouflage gear, sitting in a tree stand, looking down at a viewer. It was a picture of me, taken from above. The camera hadn't been strapped to the tree trunk where I found it. He had been holding it. I slowly looked up. Directly above me, perched on a branch about 10 feet higher, a pair of boots were dangling. And then I heard the distinct digital click of a camera shutter. I didn't climb down. I jumped. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and ran until my lungs burned. I didn't stop for my truck. I ran all the way to the main road. The police never found him, but they found my camera sitting on the seat of my truck. The SD card was gone.
The utility worker. If you ever find a small white X drawn in chalk near your back door, do not go inside. Do not call your parents. Call the police immediately. I didn't know what that mark meant until a man in a high-visibility vest unlocked my door while I was standing 5 feet away. This happened 3 years ago in rural Ohio, where our house sits hidden behind a mile of thick cornfields. I was 13, home alone, having faked a stomachache to skip school. I felt like the king of the world until I saw the movement in the driveway. A white van rolled to a stop. No radio music, no engine rumble, just silence. A man stepped out. He looked perfect. Yellow safety vest, hard hat, clipboard. He looked like every utility worker you've ever ignored. But then he broke the rules. He didn't walk to the front door. He didn't ring the doorbell. He moved with a strange, focused speed around the side of the house, directly toward the backyard where the street view is blocked. I waited for a knock. 5 minutes passed. 10. The house was dead silent. A cold signal fired down my spine. The biology of survival took over. I dropped to the floor and crawled across the carpet to the kitchen, keeping below the window line. I reached the sliding glass door and peeked through the tiniest slit in the vertical blinds. My breath stuck in my throat. He wasn't checking the gas meter. He was standing on the patio mat, his face pressed hard against the glass, hands cupped around his eyes. He wasn't working. He was scanning the living room. He was hunting for motion. I froze. Then, he reached into his tool belt. I prayed for a meter reader. Instead, he pulled out a thin silver metal pistol. Click. The sound was deafening in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't a firearm. It was a mechanical lockpick gun. I watched in horror as the latch on the inside of the door, the one meant to keep me safe, slowly began to rotate to the left. He wasn't breaking in. He was letting himself in. I grabbed a steak knife from the drying rack, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The lock finished turning, the handle depressed. The door slid open an inch. The cold November air hit my face. Suddenly, chaos. The neighbor's German shepherd, an acre away, had spotted him. The dog went berserk, throwing itself against the fence. The man froze. He didn't look at the dog. He turned his head and looked directly at the slit in the blinds where I was hiding. He couldn't have seen me in the dark kitchen, but he stared right into my eyes. And then, he smiled. It was a tight, calm, terrifying smile. He let go of the door handle. He put the tool back in his belt, adjusted his hard hat, and walked calmly back to his van like he had just finished a routine inspection. I called the police the second his taillights disappeared. They took a report, but there wasn't much they could do. Before the officer left, though, he called me out to the back patio. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the bricks right under the door handle. There was a small X drawn in white chalk. The officer told me that fake workers use it to mark houses for other crews. It means easy target. I called the utility companies the next day. No one had been scheduled. The vest was a costume. The clipboard was a prop. He wasn't a worker, he was a scout, and he had marked my house for next time.
The wrong address. I thought the man standing on my porch was just a confused delivery driver. I was wrong. He wasn't looking for the right address. He was looking for me. And the scariest part wasn't that he tried to break in. It was that he had a key that worked perfectly. I was 19, living in a rented duplex in Austin. My boyfriend worked nights, so from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I was the only one home. It started on a Tuesday night. I was craving food, so I ordered delivery. 20 minutes later, headlights flashed across the living room window. I peeked through the blinds. An old, rusted-out sedan sat at the curb with its lights killed. A man got out. He didn't look like a delivery driver. He walked up the driveway, set a brown paper bag on the porch, and walked away without ringing the bell. I waited until the car sputtered off before opening the door. I grabbed the bag. It felt light, too light for food. I opened it. Inside, there were no tacos. There was a plastic baby doll. Its hair had been hacked off with scissors, and its eyes had been painted over with thick black nail polish. I dropped the bag. My boyfriend told me it was probably just neighborhood kids playing a prank. I wanted to believe him. But the next night, the prank turned into a threat. I heard the mail slot clatter. I walked into the hallway and saw a piece of lined notebook paper lying on the doormat. I picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, jagged, like someone writing with their left hand. It read, "I like the red shirt you wore today. It fits you better than the blue one." My breath hitched. I had worn a red shirt that morning. I had changed into a blue one after lunch, inside my bedroom with the blinds drawn. This person hadn't just seen me through a window. They had been watching me inside the house. That night, around 3 a.m., I was sitting on the couch with a baseball bat across my lap, staring at the front door. The house was dead silent. Then, I heard it. Jingle, jingle. It was the sound of keys. Not keys outside. Keys sliding into the lock. I stared at the deadbolt. I knew I had locked it. But as I watched, the little metal thumb turn began to slowly rotate to the left. Click. The lock disengaged. The handle turned. I screamed, "I have a gun! Get away!" I threw my entire body weight against the door just as it popped open. The security chain caught it, stopping it with a violent jerk. Through the 3-inch gap, I saw him. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a dad. He was maybe 50, wearing a polo shirt, looking completely calm. He smiled at me through the crack in the door. He didn't try to force his way in. He just whispered, his voice smooth and polite. "I just need to check the smoke detectors. It's mandatory." I slammed the door shut, threw the deadbolt, and pushed a heavy oak bookshelf in front of it. I sat there screaming until the police arrived. They caught him a week later. It turns out he wasn't a random stalker. He was the landlord's estranged son. He had been evicted years ago, but he had kept a copy of the master key. But that wasn't the worst part. When the police searched the house, they found a loose panel in the ceiling of my bedroom closet. Inside the attic crawl space, they found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a small hole drilled through the drywall. He hadn't just been watching from the street. The hole looked directly down into my shower. He hadn't just been watching me change clothes. He had been sleeping 10 feet above my head every single night, waiting for the right moment to come downstairs and check the smoke detectors.
The Fabric Men. The police report said Jamie and his roommate ran away, but that's impossible. It was 10 degrees below zero, and their boots were still by the door. They didn't leave the room. Something else entered it, and the only evidence left behind was a cheap plastic snow globe sitting on the nightstand. Jamie was 8 years old when he was sent to St. Joseph's Home for Boys. It was a bleak, sterile building surrounded by high fences and dead winter woods. Jamie was an outcast. His only friend was his roommate Bradley, a quiet kid with thick glasses who slept in the bed next to him. One night, Jamie found something under his bed, a snow globe. It wasn't his. Inside, a tiny plastic house sat in a blizzard of white glitter. But when he shook it, the snow didn't settle. It kept swirling, faster and faster, like a storm trapped in glass. He put it on the nightstand and went to sleep. He woke up at 3 a.m. The room was freezing. Jamie looked over at Bradley's bed. The lamp was on. The sheets were pulled back, but Bradley was gone. "Bradley," Jamie whispered. Silence. The door to the hallway was shut. The window was locked tight. It was like the boy had just ceased to exist. Then the heavy oak door groaned. It didn't open like a door. It bowed inward, as if something massive was pushing against it. The latch snapped. The door swung open. They didn't walk in. They shuffled. 6 figures entered the room. They were huge, 7 feet tall and impossibly broad. They had no faces, no skin. They were heaps of heavy, moth-eaten wool, layers of red, brown, and gray blankets, smelling of old dust, mildew, and stale attic air. Jamie scrambled back against his headboard, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to scream, but the air felt thick, heavy. The brown entity moved first. It didn't have hands. It had massive, heavy sleeves. It lunged. It wasn't an attack. It was an engulfment. The heavy wool pinned Jamie's arms to his sides. He couldn't breathe. The weight was crushing, dry, and hot. It felt like being buried alive in a laundry chute. Then the largest entity entered, the black one. It stood at the foot of the bed. It didn't have a face, just a hollow, dark opening where a hood should be. It didn't speak with a mouth. Jamie felt the voice vibrate in his own chest, a deep baritone hum that rattled his teeth. "You are cold, child. Let us keep you warm forever." The room began to dissolve. The white walls of the orphanage turned soft, morphing into layers of thick, suffocating quilts. The floor opened up, not into a basement, but into a pit of writhing fabric vines. Jamie looked down into the pit. He saw Bradley. The boy with glasses was wrapped tight like a mummy, his eyes wide and frozen, sinking silently into the depths of the bedding. Jamie felt the fabric vines wrap around his ankles, then his waist, then his throat. They were dry and scratchy. They pulled him down into the darkness. The next morning, the nuns opened the door to room 302 for roll call. The room was empty. The beds were perfectly made. Jamie Turner and Bradley Ewing were never seen again. No footprints led out into the snow. No locks were broken. The police took the snow globe into evidence. It sat in a box for 20 years. But recently, a cold case detective looked closely at the file photo of that globe. He noticed something the original officers missed. Buried in the fake plastic snow, there are 2 tiny figures. One is wearing glasses, and the other is wearing green dinosaur pajamas. And if you use a magnifying glass, you can see that their hands are pressed against the glass, screaming to get out.
The Spider Woman. I am writing this from a court-ordered psychiatric facility. The doctors tell me it was a psychotic break. They tell me the creature wasn't real, but they can't explain the sound. If monsters aren't real, why can I still hear its legs clicking against the metal ventilation ducts above my bed? It happened the summer before my senior year. I had just undergone major reconstructive surgery on my knee. My leg was in a full cast, and I was prescribed a heavy dose of high-grade painkillers to manage the agony. My mom had to leave for a business trip, so she set me up on the living room couch with water, snacks, and my pills. She told me to just rest. By 10:09 p.m., the pain was throbbing like a heartbeat in my leg. I swallowed 2 more pills and drifted into a heavy chemical sleep. I woke up around 2:00 a.m. The room was pitch black, lit only by the red standby light of the TV. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. My body felt like lead. The drugs had paralyzed me. Then I heard it. Click, drag, click, drag. A wet, rhythmic sound coming from the hallway. I strained my eyes in the darkness. Something was moving on the floor. A shape emerged from the shadows. It was low to the ground. It had too many limbs. Long, pale, twisted arms and legs jutting out at impossible angles. It was crawling toward me, dragging its belly across the carpet. It looked like a woman, but broken. Her head hung loosely, swinging side to side. Her eyes were gone, replaced by clusters of glistening black orbs. She stopped right next to the couch. I wanted to scream, but my throat was frozen. A thick, black liquid drooled from her mouth. It landed on my hand. It was hot. It smelled like copper. The creature hissed, a distorted radiostatic sound. She raised a twisted claw toward my face. The terror broke my paralysis. Adrenaline flooded my system. I threw myself off the couch, ignoring the screaming pain in my knee. I grabbed the heavy brass fireplace poker my mom kept on the hearth. The creature lunged. I swung. I heard a sickening crack. She screeched, a high, piercing wail. She fell to the floor. I didn't stop. I was fueled by pure, primal survival instinct. I swung the heavy brass poker again, and again, and again. I watched the black liquid spray across the carpet, covering the walls, covering me. I kept hitting until the creature stopped moving, until the screeching stopped, until I was standing over a pile of broken limbs, panting, covered in the black slime. Then the exhaustion took me. I passed out on top of the body. I woke up to the sound of beeping. I wasn't in my living room. I was in a hospital bed. My hands were cuffed to the rails. A detective was sitting in the chair next to me. He looked tired. He looked sick. "Did you find it?" I croaked, my throat dry as sand. "Did you kill the spider thing?" The detective didn't say a word. He just opened a manila folder and placed a photo on my chest. I looked at it, and my soul died. It wasn't a spider. It was my girlfriend, Sarah. She had come over to surprise me. She used the spare key to check on me. The police think she had dropped the TV remote under the coffee table. She was on her hands and knees, crawling on the floor, trying to find it quietly so she wouldn't wake me up. The black liquid wasn't alien slime. It was blood. In the dark, red looks black. I'm in a cell now. The drugs are out of my system, but I can't sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I don't see Sarah. I see the Spider Woman, and I know she's waiting for me to turn off the lights.
The Cloud Link. I bought a used smart home hub from a pawn shop to save $20. It was the biggest mistake of my life, because when I plugged it in, it didn't just connect to the internet. It connected to a live camera feed that had been watching me sleep for months. It was winter break, and the apartment complex was a concrete ghost town. Everyone had gone home, leaving me alone in the building. I needed a backup drive for my design projects, so I bought a dusty, all-in-one hub from a shady shop downtown. I plugged it into my laptop, expecting to reformat it. But when the drive mounted, it wasn't empty. There was a single hidden folder buried deep in the system files. It was titled in all caps, Project Observe. My stomach dropped. I should have unplugged it right there. But curiosity is a curse. I opened the folder. It contained hundreds of audio files. No names, just dates. I scrolled to the bottom. The most recent file was dated today. I put my headphones on and clicked play. The sound was faint at first. A wet, rhythmic noise. Heavy breathing. The soft rustle of fabric. Then a cough. It was a recording of someone sleeping. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I realized the audio wasn't from the previous owner. The drive was syncing to a cloud account. It was downloading new files right now. Then, a video file appeared in the folder. It wasn't an MP4. It was a live stream link. I clicked it. A window opened on my laptop screen. The feed was grainy, black and white night vision. It showed a messy living room. A desk. A person sitting in a chair, wearing headphones, staring at a laptop. It took my brain a full 5 seconds to process the image. I wasn't watching a recording. I was watching myself. I spun around in my chair, heart hammering against my ribs, scanning the room. The camera wasn't coming from the device on my desk. It was high up, in the corner of the ceiling. There, barely visible, taped over the fire sprinkler sensor, was a tiny, pinhole lens. I looked back at the screen. In the video feed, I watched myself spin around in panic. But then, a text chat box popped up over the video stream. The cursor blinked. Then the words appeared, typing out slowly, letter by letter. "You're watching the wrong channel, Dave." My stomach bottomed out. "My name is Dave." Before I could scream, the power in my apartment cut out. The room plunged into total darkness. The only light came from the blue ring of the smart hub on my desk. Then, the device's AI voice spoke into the silence. It was loud, distorted, and cheerful. "Front door, open." I didn't think. I grabbed my keys and sprinted to the bathroom. I locked the door, backed into the shower stall, and pulled the curtain, clutching a bottle of shampoo like a weapon. I held my breath, listening. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy boots on hardwood floors. They didn't rush. They moved with a slow, heavy confidence. They walked right past the kitchen and stopped directly outside the bathroom door. I saw the shadow of feet under the crack. I waited for the kick. I waited for the door to splinter. The handle jiggled. Once. Twice. Then silence. I stayed in that shower for 3 hours. When the sun finally came up, I worked up the courage to open the door. The apartment was empty. The front door was wide open. But as I stepped out of the bathroom, I stepped on something. A piece of paper had been slid under the door while I was hiding. It was a small, thermal printout, like a receipt. It was a grainy photo of me, curled up in my bed, fast asleep. The timestamp in the corner was 3 a.m. that morning. Whoever was watching me hadn't just hacked my computer. They had a key, and they had been coming into my room while I slept for a long, long time.
The misfire. The police told me I was the luckiest man in Ohio, but they didn't see what I saw. I spent 6 minutes in a windowless box staring down the black matte barrel of a 9mm, watching a man's finger squeeze the trigger over and over again. Every time I heard that hollow, mechanical click instead of a bang, I felt a part of my soul leave my body. I worked asset protection in Canton for 3 years. You think you're used to the adrenaline until the routine turns into a death sentence. It was December 18th when we spotted Andre Robinson. He wasn't just shoplifting, he was vibrating with a frantic, jagged energy that should have sent us running the other way. We intercepted him near the exit and brought him to the loss prevention office, thinking it was just another day of paperwork and police calls. The moment that heavy door clicked shut, the air turned to lead. Shoplifters usually scream or beg, but Andre was a statue. He sat in that cheap plastic chair, staring at the wall while his leg twitched at a speed that didn't seem human. When I asked for his ID, he didn't reach for a wallet. He looked at me with eyes that were completely void, like he had already processed my funeral in his head. He didn't yell, he didn't warn us, he just stood up and reached into the small of his back. My brain couldn't even register the threat until I saw the weapon. My partner lunged, hitting the desk and sending monitors crashing to the floor, but I was pinned. I was trapped between a filing cabinet and the wall with nowhere to go. I watched his knuckle turn white as he squeezed the trigger. Click! A pathetic hollow sound that should have been the last thing I ever heard. The gun had a failure to feed. In that second, the room ran out of oxygen. He didn't panic. He racked the slide to clear the jam, while my partner screamed, wrestling for the barrel. I could see the brass of the casing caught in the ejection port, a tiny piece of metal standing between me and the end of my life. He pulled it again. Click! It was a malfunctioning machine trying its hardest to kill me. I was looking down a dark tunnel, waiting for the flash that never came. Finally, the door burst open as managers rushed in. They tackled him, pinning his arms, and the gun finally slid across the tile toward me like a discarded toy. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't even move my hands. When the police arrived, an officer looked at the weapon and told me the round was seated wrong. The gun was a piece of junk, and that was the only reason I was still standing. I quit a week later. Now, every time I hear a mechanical click or see a man with a backpack, my heart rate spikes. The police report from Canton in December 2025 confirms every word of this. Andre Robinson was arrested and charged with attempted murder and several weapons counts. Canton Police Department released the official statement shortly after the incident on December 18, 2025. Officers responded to the Walmart on Tuscarawas Street West following reports of a suspect pulling a firearm on employees during a shoplifting investigation. The suspect, 33-year-old Andre L. Robinson, was apprehended after a violent struggle in the Loss Prevention Office. Evidence technicians confirmed that the firearm Robinson brandished was loaded but had suffered a mechanical malfunction during the attempt to fire. Robinson is currently being held on a high bond facing charges of attempted murder, felonious assault, and carrying a concealed weapon.
The inside man. The scariest thing about being betrayed isn't the act itself. It's the realization that you were smiling at your enemy for months. I worked the electronics department at a supercenter in Palm Beach County, a place where everything of value is locked behind plexiglass fortresses. I thought the keys were the only thing keeping the store safe, but I forgot that the person holding the keys is the only one who truly knows how to pick the lock. I worked the closing shift with a girl named Sarah. We were a team. We shared lunch breaks, complained about the overbearing management, and vented about our lives while stocking shelves. I trusted her with my secrets and my friendship, never realizing she was using that closeness as a smokescreen to bleed the company dry of $25,000. In early 2025, the store started to feel like a crime scene. Entire boxes of iPhones and high-end gaming laptops began vanishing into thin air. These weren't petty thefts, these were surgical strikes. Management went into a full-blown panic, forcing us through drug tests and searching our bags. Every time we stepped off the floor, I felt like a criminal just for clocking in, and Sarah was right there next to me, acting just as terrified and insulted as I was. She was so convincing that I actually spent my breaks comforting her. She told me she was scared of losing her job, and I believed every word. Then came a Tuesday night in June that shattered everything. I had finished my floor pull early and was heading to the back when I realized I'd left my water bottle near the loading dock. As I approached the rear of the store, I saw something that stopped my heart, a heavy fire exit propped open with a single pack of gum. I stayed in the shadows, my pulse thundering in my ears. I expected to see a masked intruder, but instead I saw Sarah. She walked up to the door carrying a plastic bin overflowing with thousands of dollars in tech. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She looked bored. A man in a dark hoodie met her at the door, took the bin, and vanished into the night without a word. Sarah just kicked the gum away, let the door click shut, and walked back to the floor like she had just finished a routine task. The sickness I felt in that moment was worse than any fear. The person I had been venting to, the person who had looked me in the eye and lied for months, was the one burning the whole place down. I didn't confront her. I knew a crew that could move that much product was dangerous. I went to the store manager the next morning, and the fallout was a bloodbath. It turns out Sarah knew every blind spot in the camera system and every minute of the lead's meeting schedules. She was the perfect insider because she knew exactly how to weaponize my trust. Watching the Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies lead her out in handcuffs in July 2025 was the hardest thing I've ever seen. I didn't feel bad for her. I felt foolish. They recovered the stolen merchandise from a nearby apartment, and the court records detailed a sophisticated theft ring that Sarah had been choreographing from within our electronics cage. I don't make friends at work anymore. I do my time and I leave. Every time I hear the click of a key or see a fire exit, I think about Sarah and how easy it was for her to watch me struggle while she handed the keys to the kingdom to a ghost in a hoodie.
The false witness. The scariest people in the world are not the ones carrying weapons. They are the ones who truly believe their own lies. I've worked security long enough to see every trick in the book, but I have never witnessed anything as chilling as weaponized delusion. I watched a woman dial 911 to report her own kidnapping while she was standing 3 feet away from a police officer who was calmly telling her she was trespassing. It was a freezing Tuesday in January 2025. When she walked into the seasonal section, I recognized her immediately. We had officially barred her from the property months ago for threatening staff, and by law, her presence was a crime. I approached her and politely reminded her that she had to leave. Most people would argue or storm out, but she didn't move. She just pulled herself up to her full height and started reciting a script about maritime law and corporate personhood. She claimed the store was a public vessel and that as a living soul, she was untouchable. There was a total lack of doubt in her eyes that made my skin crawl. When she refused to budge, I called for backup. A young officer arrived and tried to explain the reality of private property, but that is when she flipped the script in a way that felt like a descent into a nightmare. She pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and put it on speaker. The moment the dispatcher answered, her voice transformed into a frantic, terrified sob. She told the operator she was being held against her will by an armed man who was threatening to abduct her. The officer was standing right there with his hands visible and his body cam rolling, staring at her in total disbelief as she described a violent assault that wasn't happening. She began detailing the bruises she was receiving and the way he was touching her, all while standing perfectly still in the middle of the aisle. It was psychological horror in its purest form. For a split second, looking at the conviction on her face, I almost doubted my own eyes. She wasn't just lying to get out of a ticket. She was manifesting a completely different reality in real time to try and destroy a man's life. The standoff lasted 10 minutes, a surreal scene of her screaming for help, while customers walked by staring in confusion. The officer finally realized that logic was useless against someone who had abandoned the truth. The second he reached for his handcuffs, she lunged at him, swinging her phone like a weapon and screaming that she was a sovereign being. It took 3 of us to finally get her into the back of the cruiser. The body cam footage from late January 2025 became a viral case study because of the chilling disconnect between her words and the world around her. She was charged with criminal trespass, resisting arrest, and making a false report, but the legal victory felt hollow. I still have dreams about that phone call. It makes you realize that you can't reason with someone who has rewritten the truth. Now, every time I have to trespass someone, I keep my distance and make sure my own phone is recording. You never know when someone is going to try and erase the reality right in front of you.
Most engagement rings have a diamond, but mine was carved from a human knuckle bone. The man I'd loved for a year wasn't waiting for a yes, he was waiting for the oven to preheat. Liam always told me he was hungry for a life together, but as we sat in that secluded mountain cabin, I realized his hunger was literal. He held my hand on the drive up, whispering that we were destined to become one, and I was stupid enough to think it was romantic. The cabin didn't smell like pine or wood smoke, it smelled like copper and industrial bleach. Uncle Silas was already there, a mountain of a man with hands the color of raw brisket. He didn't greet me. He just kept swinging a heavy cleaver against a wooden block. Thud, thud, thud. Every strike felt like it was hitting my own spine. When I asked about the massive iron padlock on the cellar door, Liam didn't look away from the kitchen. He just smiled and said Silas was very protective of his special aged stock and that I'd be tasting it soon. Dinner was served in a silence so thick I could hear the grease congealing on my plate. The meat was dark, sweet, and fell apart like velvet, a flavor so rich it felt wrong. Silas didn't eat. He just leaned back, his unblinking eyes tracking every move of my fork. Suddenly, Liam's hand clamped over mine. He was pale, vibrating with a frantic energy that made my skin crawl. He dropped to one knee, but he didn't look at my face. He looked at my throat. He opened a small velvet box to reveal that porous, yellowed ring of bone and whispered that he wanted my blood to be his blood. The sweetness of the meat turned to bile in my throat. I stumbled back, gasping for air, making a pathetic excuse to leave the table. I scrambled into the mudroom, desperate for my keys, but my foot kicked a heavy black trash bag tucked in the corner. It tore open, a hiking boot spilled out, and inside it, the jagged, gray remains of a severed human foot. The cellar door behind me didn't just open, it shrieked. Liam stood there, tears streaming down his face, holding a meat hook. He asked why I was running when they had worked so hard to get the temperature right. I didn't scream. I didn't have the breath for it. I smashed a glass vase across his temple and sprinted into the freezing dark. Every lungful of sub-zero air felt like swallowing needles, but the sound of heavy boots crunching the snow behind me kept me moving. I flagged down a snowplow, my fingernails bleeding from clawing at the door. When the police reached the cabin, the hearth was still warm, but the men were gone. The table was still set for 3, and resting on my empty chair was a printed recipe card with my weight and blood type listed as the primary ingredients. I moved 3 states away and changed my name, but the terror never left. I stopped using delivery apps and I never look at rental listings. Last night, I found a small gift box on my doorstep. There was no card, just a single polished knuckle bone ring that was much smaller than the first one. It was sized perfectly for my pinky finger. They aren't just hungry anymore, they're patient.
I thought I'd finally won a race. I didn't know I was running when Maya asked me out. But I didn't realize the prize was a permanent seat in her collection. She called El Amor Eternal a hidden gem, a basement bistro lit by 1,000 flickering red candles. When we arrived, the silence wasn't romantic. It was heavy, like the air inside a coffin. I looked at the couple at the next table and my stomach cramped. They weren't talking, they weren't eating. They were just staring at each other with wide, glassy eyes that never seemed to blink. Maya didn't seem to notice. She was a whirlwind of energy, her blonde hair shimmering in the candlelight as she told me I was the perfect fit for her life. I tried to laugh, but the waiter moved past us with a mechanical hitching gait that made my skin crawl. There was no clatter of silverware in the kitchen, no hum of conversation, just the rhythmic, wet sound of Maya sipping her wine. When I accidentally dropped my fork and reached under the table to grab it, the scream died in my throat. The waiter's trouser leg was pushed up, revealing a heavy metal rod bolted directly into a porcelain calf. I sat back up, my pulse thundering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I looked closer at the guests in the room. Their skin wasn't skin, it was polished, seamless, and frozen. One woman's hand was locked around a wine glass so tightly, the porcelain was beginning to hairline crack. I looked at Maya, expecting her to be terrified, but she was leaning in with a smile that was suddenly too wide, too fixed. She whispered that she just wanted one perfect night before the integration began, her voice losing its warmth and becoming a flat, synthesized drone. Before I could move, she pulled a long surgical needle from her clutch, the fluid inside clear and viscous. She told me not to worry, that I was going to be the most beautiful display piece she had ever designed. I didn't wait for the needle. I flipped the table into her lap, the red candles igniting the heavy velvet cloth in a roar of chemical flames. As I scrambled for the stairs, the waiters didn't chase me. They toppled over, their hollow limbs clattering against the stone floor like falling headstones. From the center of the fire, Maya let out a high-pitched, mechanical screech that vibrated in my very marrow. I burst out into the cold city air and didn't stop running until I reached the precinct. But when the police kicked in the door to the basement, there was no restaurant. There was only an abandoned storage unit filled with layers of dust and the charred remains of a few theater props. They thought I was having a breakdown until I reached into my coat pocket. Tucked inside was a small, laminated retail tag. On one side, it listed my height, weight, and eye color. On the other, in Maya's elegant script, were the words, "Reserved for Valentine's Day, do not sell." I've deleted every app and moved to a windowless apartment, but the world feels like a gallery I can't escape. Last night, I walked past a department store at midnight and froze. There in the center of the display was a mannequin wearing the exact shirt I'd lost that night, its plastic face carved into a perfect, agonizing scream. I could feel Maya's eyes watching me from behind the glass, measuring me for the next season's collection.
My husband promised he would never leave me, but I didn't realize that death was just a minor inconvenience to him. 6 months after the car accident that crushed his chest, the silence of our home was broken by the arrival of a bouquet of yellow lilies on the porch. They were Mark's favorite. The card attached was written in his exact, messy cursive, claiming he had returned. I wanted to believe it was a prank, but as I touched the petals, they felt cold, like they had been stored in a freezer. The manifestations escalated with a surgical precision that mocked my grief. I found a necklace I'd lost years ago sitting in a pool of water on the kitchen counter. Then came Toby. My 5-year-old walked into the room with his eyes fixed on the empty chair at the head of the table. He told me Daddy was sorry for being late, but the traffic was dead. I ran to the security monitors, but the footage made my heart seize. The lilies hadn't been delivered. They simply flickered into existence on the porch like a glitch in reality. By evening, the house had transformed into a tomb. The air was so frozen I could see my own breath clustering in thick clouds, yet the thermostat read 75 degrees. I hurried to Toby's room, but stopped when I heard our wedding song scratching through his toy record player. The melody was warped, the pitch dragged down into a guttural, demonic moan. I pushed the door open to find Toby staring into the black void of his closet. He whispered that Daddy was finally here, but that he looked different now. The bedroom door didn't just close, it slammed with a force that cracked the frame. From the shadows of the closet, a shape lurched into the light. It wore Mark's favorite flannel, but the man inside was a ruin of shattered bone and gray flesh. His head hung at the same impossible, sickening angle described in the coroner's report. His eyes were gone, replaced by twin pits of wet, shifting darkness. He didn't speak with his mouth. Instead, a voice rasped from the very walls, claiming that we belonged with him. He reached out a hand that looked like wet ash, moving toward Toby. Survival instinct overrode my terror. I grabbed a brass lamp and swung it with everything I had, but the metal passed through his chest as if I were hitting a cloud of ice water. The figure let out a shriek that sounded like grinding metal, and every window in the room shattered outward at once. I scooped Toby up and dove through the jagged remains of the door, driving until the sun rose and the world felt solid again. I never stepped foot in that house again, and even the professional movers quit halfway through, claiming the air inside felt heavy, like it was trying to drown them. I live in a new city now, and Toby's memories of that night have faded into childhood fog. But every February 14th, the temperature in my room plummets to a bone-chilling 0. I wake up to find a single, withered yellow lily petal tucked under my pillow. He isn't gone. He's just waiting for the day I finally stop running so he can finish our vow.
I'm holding it right now. I'm scared to drop it, but I'm terrified to keep touching it. It doesn't look like a normal subway pass. It's long, gray, and warm. It feels like dried leather, or maybe cured skin. It smells like old blood and ozone. There is text printed on it, in a font that looks like it was branded into the material with a hot iron. It says, Passenger, David. Status, unpaid. And at the bottom, collection date, today. I don't know what happens when collection starts, but the lights in my apartment just flickered. They didn't turn off. They turned a sickly, sulfur yellow. And from the hallway, I can hear a sound. Thump, drag, thump, drag. If you are reading this, and you find yourself on a subway car where the lights turn yellow, do not close your eyes. Run. This started yesterday, Tuesday night. I worked downtown. By the time I clocked out, the city felt dead. It was that heavy, wet kind of midnight where the streets are empty and the air smells like cold rain. I just wanted to get home. I ran down the subway stairs, swiped my card, and caught the express train just as the doors were closing. I stepped into the last car. It was completely empty. I love the empty cars. No tourists, no noise, just the hum of the engine. I sat in the corner seat, the one by the window, and let my head tip back against the glass. The train lurched forward. The rhythm was hypnotic. Click-clack, click-clack. The gentle swaying rocked me like a cradle. I told myself I wouldn't sleep. I just needed to close my eyes for a minute. Just 60 seconds to rest my burning eyes. I watched the tunnel lights streak by, blur, black, blur, black, until they faded into nothing. I drifted off. I don't know how long I was out. It couldn't have been long. But I woke up because of the cold. It wasn't a draft. It was a deep, biting chill that felt like I was waking up inside a meat locker. I sat up, shivering, rubbing my arms. The air tasted metallic, like I was sucking on a penny. Jesus, I whispered, my breath fogging in the air. I looked around, and that's when the feeling hit me. You know that sensation when you walk into a room and the hair on the back of your neck stands up? That primal, lizard brain instinct screaming you are in danger? It washed over me instantly. The first thing I noticed was the light. Subway cars have those harsh, white fluorescent strips. But these lights were dim. They were yellow. Not a warm yellow. A sickly, buzzing, bruised yellow. It made the whole car look jaundiced. I looked out the window to check for a station. Usually, even in the tunnels, you can see graffiti, maintenance lights, or the flash of other tracks. But outside the glass, there was nothing. I mean nothing. It wasn't just dark. It was a solid, blurring wall of gray, wet concrete. We were moving fast. Too fast. The tunnel was tight, barely inches from the glass. There were no brakes. No stations. Just an infinite tube of gray rushing by at impossible speed. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy. Hello. My voice died in the air. The car was silent. No engine hum. No rattle of wheels. Just a smooth, silent gliding sensation, like we were falling. I walked toward the middle of the car. That's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. When I fell asleep, the car was empty. Now, there were 3 other people. I felt a rush of relief. "Hey," I called out, walking toward them. "Do you guys know what's going on? Did we miss the stop?" They didn't answer. They didn't even turn their heads. I slowed down. The first passenger was a man in a business suit, sitting on the bench seat, facing the back of the train. He was sitting perfectly still, rigid. "Excuse me," I said, reaching out to tap his shoulder. I stopped my hand inches from his jacket. The relief in my chest turned into ice-cold dread. He was facing the wrong way, but it wasn't just his posture. I looked at his neck, where the collar of his white shirt met his skin. There was no gap. The fabric didn't rest on his skin, it was merged with it. The cotton weave of the shirt dissolved seamlessly into the flesh of his neck. It looked like melted wax that had hardened. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. What the hell? I looked at the second passenger, an old woman clutching a purse. Her hands were fused to the leather bag. Her fingers didn't end. They just became the handle of the purse. She wasn't breathing. None of them were. Their chests weren't moving. They weren't statues. They were something worse. They were waiting. I turned around. I needed to get out of this car. I needed to get to the next one. Maybe the conductor was there. Maybe there were real people in the next car. I grabbed the handle of the sliding door at the front of the car. It was stuck. I jammed my foot against the frame and pulled with everything I had. Clang. It gave a few inches. A blast of wind hit me, smelling of stale water and rot, but I could see into the next car. It was identical. Sickly yellow light. Gray blur outside. Rows of passengers facing backward. But then, the door at the far end of that car slid open. Something stepped in. It was tall. Too tall to be human. It had to duck to clear the door frame. It wore a conductor's uniform, dark blue and crisp, with a cap pulled low over its face. It walked with a heavy, uneven limp. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It stopped at the first row of seats. It loomed over one of the rigid passengers. I saw its hand come up. The fingers were long, pale, and had too many joints. Like a spider made of bone. Through the glass, I heard a voice. It sounded like sandpaper rubbing together. Ticket. The passenger didn't move. The conductor waited a beat. Then, he reached out and placed his palm over the passenger's face. I watched in horror. The passenger didn't scream. They didn't fall. They just crumbled. In seconds, the suit, the skin, the fused body, it all disintegrated into a pile of fine, gray ash on the seat. The conductor reached into a pouch at his waist, pulled out a small broom, and swept the ash into a bag. Then he turned. He looked straight down the length of the car. He looked through the glass of the door I was peering through. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them. A cold, heavy weight pressing on my skull. He knew I was there. He started walking toward my door. Thump, drag, thump, drag. He was coming for me, and I didn't have a ticket. Panic freezes you for a second. But when you see death walking toward you, panic turns into fuel. I slammed my foot against the metal door frame. Bang. I gripped the handle with both hands and pulled until I felt a tendon pop in my shoulder. The door screeched, a horrible, grinding metal sound, and slid open just wide enough for me to squeeze through. I tumbled into the space between the cars. Usually, this is the loud part of the train. The wind, the clatter of the wheels, the danger. I grabbed the safety chains and looked down, expecting to see the blur of wooden railroad ties. There were no tracks. There were no wheels. Beneath the metal grating I was standing on, there was only a bottomless, silent black void. The train wasn't riding on rails. It was floating. It was hurtling through nothingness. I didn't have time to process the impossibility of it. The door behind me, the one I had just squeezed through, slid open smoothly. Thump, drag. He was coming. I threw myself at the door to the next car. Thankfully, this one was unlocked. I burst inside, stumbling into the aisle. This car was identical to the last one. The same sulfur yellow light. The same gray concrete blurring past the windows. But this car was full. Every single seat was taken. Dozens of passengers sat in rigid silence. Men in construction vests, women in nursing scrubs, teenagers in hoodies. And every single one of them was facing backward. They were staring at me with the backs of their heads. "Help me," I screamed, running down the aisle. "We have to get out of here." No one moved. As I ran past them, I brushed against a man's shoulder. His jacket felt hard and cold, like ceramic. I reached the end of the car and looked back. The conductor was standing in the doorway I had just entered. His uniform was pristine, but his hands, His hands were dripping with that gray ash. He raised a long, pale finger and pointed at me. "Ticket," he rasped. The sound seemed to come from inside my own skull. I turned and ran. I ran through the next car and the next. It was an endless loop. Every car was the same. The yellow light buzzed in my ears like a swarm of hornets. My lungs were burning. I collapsed against the doors in the middle of the fifth car. I slid down to the floor, gasping for air. I couldn't run anymore. My legs felt like lead. Thump, drag, thump, drag. He wasn't running. He didn't have to. He was inevitable. I looked out the window, resigning myself to whatever was coming. I watched the gray concrete blur. And then I saw it. It was just a flash at first. A tiny speck of color in the monochrome world. Red. It was a signal light. An old-fashioned, rusted cage light bolted to the tunnel wall. It was flickering. As the train approached it, the blur of the concrete slowed down. The buzzing of the lights dipped in pitch. The reality of this place, it was thin there. It was glitching. I realized that was my exit. The only exit. I stood up. The conductor was entering the car. He was 20 feet away. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a ticket puncher. It looked sharp. I turned to the main subway doors, the ones that open onto the platform. I jammed my fingers into the rubber seal between the doors. "Come on," I grunted, digging my nails in. "Come on." The conductor was 10 feet away. Thump, drag. I saw the red light approaching. It was getting closer. The train shuddered. The yellow lights flickered and briefly turned white. I heaved with everything I had left. My muscles screamed. Slowly, agonizingly, the doors began to separate. An inch, 3 inches, a foot. The wind that howled into the car wasn't the stagnant air of the void. This wind smelled like garbage. It smelled like oil. It smelled like New York City. The conductor lunged. His long, pale arm shot out like a piston. His fingers grazed the back of my jacket. I felt a coldness spread through the fabric, like liquid nitrogen burning my skin. I didn't look back. I closed my eyes and jumped into the dark. I hit the ground hard. I rolled, my shoulders slamming against something sharp. Gravel dug into my cheek. The wind was knocked out of me. I lay there for a moment, gasping, waiting for the conductor to grab me, waiting to turn into ash. But nothing happened. I opened my eyes. The light was bright, harsh, white, fluorescent light. I blinked, tears streaming down my face. I smelled stale soft pretzels and urine. It was the most beautiful smell in the world. "Hey, buddy, are you crazy?" I looked up. A transit worker in an orange vest was running toward me from the platform. I was lying in the maintenance trough between the subway tracks. "Get off the tracks," he screamed. "The express is coming." I scrambled up. My body ached, but I moved. I hauled myself up onto the platform just as a train, a normal, silver, graffiti-covered train, roared past. It didn't stop. It just kept going. The worker grabbed my arm. "What is wrong with you? You jumped off the platform. I saw you. I fell," I stammered. My voice sounded raw. "I fell asleep." He looked at me like I was a junkie. "Get out of here before I call the cops. Go home, kid." I didn't argue. I limped out of the station. I walked the 10 blocks to my apartment in a daze. I touched every brick wall, every parking meter, just to make sure they were solid. They were real. I got into my apartment, locked the door, bolted it, and pushed a chair under the handle. I went straight to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. I looked terrible. My face was covered in soot. My jacket had a handprint on the back, a bleached white stain where the fabric had been drained of color. It was a nightmare, I whispered to my reflection. Just a vivid nightmare. Stress. Exhaustion. I turned on the faucet to wash my face. That's when I felt it. A tickle in the back of my throat. I coughed. It felt like a hair was stuck in my windpipe. I coughed harder, gagging. It wouldn't come out. It felt like something was unfolding. I leaned over the sink, retching. I reached 2 fingers into my mouth, clawing at my throat. I felt something. It was wet and slimy and flat. I grabbed it and pulled. It kept coming. It slid out of my throat with a wet, sucking sound. A long, gray strip of material. I dropped it into the sink. It dried instantly. It wasn't paper. It felt like leather. It felt like cured skin. I stared at it, my hands shaking so bad I had to grip the edge of the sink to stay standing. There was text printed on it. It looked like it had been branded into the skin with a hot iron. Passenger, David. Status, unpaid. Collection date, tomorrow. I stared at the word tomorrow. That's today. That's right now. I grabbed the ticket to tear it up, to flush it, to burn it. But as soon as my fingers touched it, the lights in my bathroom flickered. They didn't go out. They changed. The harsh white bathroom bulbs buzzed and dimmed. And then, they turned a deep, sickly, sulfur yellow. And from the living room, right outside the bathroom door, I heard it. Thump, drag, thump, drag. He's here. And I still don't have a ticket. But wait, the text on the skin, it's changing. The letters are rearranging themselves. It doesn't say David anymore. It says, next passenger, you. I'm passing this on. It's the only way I can leave. The fare has to be paid, and now it's in your hands. Don't let your lights turn yellow. Don't let the air turn cold. Pay the fare. Subscribe now. Join the ride. Or wait for the drag. See you on the express.
Story 1. The Smart House Glitch. This happened last October. I was 19 at the time, a sophomore in college, and like most students, I was completely broke. I was eating instant ramen for dinner 5 nights a week and picking up whatever odd jobs I could find on campus. So when my computer science professor asked if I wanted to house sit for him for a weekend, I didn't just say yes, I practically begged for it. He offered me $300 for 2 nights. All I had to do was feed his 2 golden retrievers, Buster and Bailey, and make sure the house didn't burn down while he and his wife went to a tech conference in Seattle. It sounded like the easiest money I'd ever make. When I got there on Friday afternoon, I was blown away. The place was incredible. It was one of those ultra-modern smart homes about 20 minutes out of town, completely secluded. It was surrounded by dense woods on all sides, with no neighbors for at least a mile. The architecture was all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The professor gave me the tour. He was obsessed with automation. Everything, and I mean everything, was controlled by these tablets mounted on the walls in every room. The lights, the temperature, the blinds, the music, and especially the security system. He showed me how to use the app, gave me a guest passcode, and told me to help myself to the fridge. The first night was paradise. I ordered a pizza, played with the dogs in the massive living room, and felt like a millionaire for a few hours. It was quiet, peaceful, but the second night, that's when the isolation stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling heavy. It was around 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. A storm had rolled in, and the rain was hammering against all that glass. I was in the living room, sprawled out on the couch playing video games with my headset on. The dogs were asleep on the rug in front of me. Suddenly, the room changed. The recessed lighting in the ceiling, which had been set to a warm, dim orange, suddenly flared up to 100% brightness. It was blinding white like a hospital operating room. I ripped my headset off, squinting against the glare. Then, just as fast as it turned on, it dimmed all the way down to a deep blood red. My heart did a little jump, but I immediately rationalized it. It's a glitch, I thought. Rich people tech. I put my controller down and walked over to the wall-mounted tablet near the hallway to reset the lighting. The screen was glowing in the dark hallway. I tapped the icon for the living room lights, but it was frozen. Then, a notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. Front door. Unlocked manually at 11:31 p.m. My stomach dropped. I stared at the words, waiting for them to make sense. Manually, that meant someone had physically turned the deadbolt from the inside or used a key from the outside. I turned my head slowly to look at the front door. It was heavy solid wood. It looked closed. I walked over to it, my socks sliding on the polished concrete floor. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It was locked. I checked the deadbolt. It was engaged. I let out a nervous laugh. Okay, I whispered to myself. System glitch. Stupid smart house. I went back to the tablet and checked the log. The notification was gone. The system showed all secure. I figured maybe the storm messed with a sensor or something. I tried to shake off the creepy feeling, but the house felt different now. Those floor-to-ceiling windows that looked so cool during the day, now they were just giant black mirrors reflecting the red light of the living room. I felt like I was in a fishbowl. I sat back down on the couch, but I didn't put my headset back on. I just sat there listening to the rain. 5 minutes later, I jumped. I looked at the tablet across the room. The screen lit up again. Back patio door, unlocked manually at 11:36 p.m. This time, I didn't freeze. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The back patio door was glass. It was a sliding door in the kitchen, right behind the couch where I was sitting. I stood up. The dogs, who had been sleeping soundly this whole time, suddenly sat up. Both of them, at the exact same time. Their ears were pinned back. They weren't looking at me. They were looking toward the dark kitchen. Buster let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the room. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight the professor kept in the kitchen junk drawer. I didn't turn it on yet. I crept toward the kitchen. The patio lights were off, so outside the sliding glass door was pitch black. I couldn't see anything but my own reflection and the red tint of the living room lights. I moved closer to the glass. I needed to see if the latch was undone. I pressed my face closer to the window, squinting into the dark yard. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, the backyard lit up. Standing about 3 feet from the glass was a man. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was wearing a dark raincoat soaked through. He wasn't trying to pry the door open. He was holding a small gray device like a car key fob, and he was pointing it directly at the lock. He looked up. He didn't run. He didn't look surprised that I saw him. He just smiled, a wide, rehearsed smile that showed way too many teeth. He raised the fob and clicked it again. The latch on the sliding door popped open right in front of my face. I didn't scream. I just reacted. I slammed the manual deadbolt shut, the one that wasn't connected to the smart system, and sprinted for the garage. I grabbed the dogs by their collars, dragged them into the professor's car, locked the doors, and called 911. The cops arrived 10 minutes later. The guy was gone, but when they checked the smart system logs, they found something that still keeps me up at night. The logs showed that the guest bedroom window had been opened at 10 p.m., an hour and a half before I noticed the lights. He hadn't been trying to break in. He had already been inside. He was just playing with me. Story 2, the night shift. I used to work the graveyard shift at a gas station off I-70. It was a boring job, mostly just truckers buying cigarettes and teenagers buying energy drinks. You learn to tune people out. You scan the items, take the cash, and stare at your phone until the next person walks in. But you never tune out the ones who don't act right. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Dead silence outside. No traffic on the highway. Just the buzzing of the lights. A beat-up gray sedan rolled into the lot. It didn't pull up to a pump. It parked right in front of the glass doors, facing the counter. The headlights stayed on, blinding me for a second, and the engine didn't cut off. A guy got out. He was tall, wearing a heavy winter coat, even though it was July. He walked in, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me as soon as the automatic doors slid open. It smelled like wet dog and copper, like old pennies. He didn't look at me. He didn't even acknowledge I was there. He walked straight to the back aisle where we keep the automotive stuff, oil, antifreeze, brake fluid. I watched him on the little security monitor behind the counter. He stood in front of the motor oil for 5 minutes. Not moving, not browsing, just vibrating, like he was shivering violently, but standing perfectly still. I started to get that prickling feeling on the back of my neck. I looked at the phone, wondering if I should pretend to make a call. Finally, he grabbed a bottle of brake fluid and turned toward the counter. When he walked up, my blood went cold. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot, and he wasn't blinking. But his mouth was set in a tight, straight line like he was holding his breath. "Just this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to provoke him. He didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket. I tensed up, my hand hovering near the panic button under the register, thinking he was grabbing a gun. Instead, he pulled out a handful of crumpled cash and dropped it on the counter. It was wet. I looked down at the money. It was covered in a dark, sticky substance. It wasn't oil. It was too red for oil. "Sir," I said. I didn't touch the money. He leaned in close, closer than anyone should. "It won't come off," he whispered. His voice sounded like he had gravel in his throat. It was wet and strained. I scrubbed it, but it won't come off. I looked at his hands. Under the dirt and grime, his knuckles were raw. The skin was scrubbed pink and bleeding. The dark substance on the money, it was on his cuffs too, stained deep into the fabric of that heavy coat. "I can call someone for you," I said. "Do you need help?" He slammed his hand on the counter. "Don't," he hissed. Then his face changed. The anger vanished in a split second, replaced by that same blank, wide-eyed stare. It was like a switch flipped in his brain. He grabbed the brake fluid, turned around, and walked out. He got in his car, but he didn't leave. He sat there, engine idling, staring at me through the glass. For 2 hours. I locked the front doors. I turned off the open sign. I hid in the back office, watching him on the grainy security camera. Every time a customer would pull in for gas, he would duck down in his seat, hiding below the dashboard. As soon as they drove away, he'd pop back up and stare right at the glass doors. I was terrified he was waiting for me to leave. I was terrified he was going to come back in. At 5 a.m., the big delivery truck for the morning pastries showed up. It was huge and loud. As soon as the truck pulled into the lot, the gray sedan floored it. He peeled out of the lot, running the red light at the intersection, and disappeared onto the highway. I told the morning manager when he arrived. He brushed it off, said it was just another junkie, and told me to get some sleep. But before I left, I looked at the crumpled bills he had left on the counter. I had put them in a plastic bag before dropping them in the safe. I looked closely. It wasn't paint. It wasn't grease. It was dried blood. I quit 2 days later. I don't know what he was trying to clean off his car or his hands. And honestly, I don't want to know. I just know that sometimes late at night, when I see a gray sedan idling in a parking lot, I can still smell that copper. Story 3. The Facebook Marketplace Trap. If something seems too good to be true, it is. I learned that the hard way, and I'm lucky I learned it without losing my life. I'm a musician, which is just a polite way of saying I'm broke. I collect vintage gear when I can afford it, which is almost never. But a few months ago, I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace at 2 in the morning and I saw it. A listing for a 1996 Fender Stratocaster in sunburst finish. The seller, a guy named Mark, listed it for $500. For anyone who doesn't know guitars, that instrument is worth triple that amount easy. The description said he was cleaning out his grandfather's attic and just wanted it gone fast. The photos looked legit, dusty case, old strings, clearly sitting in an attic. I messaged him immediately. He replied the next morning, super polite, normal grammar. He said he had a few other people interested, but since I messaged first, I had dibs. We agreed to meet that evening at 7 p.m. I suggested a Starbucks in a town about 45 minutes away from me. It was a public place, well lit, totally safe. I asked my roommate Dave to come with me. Not because I was scared, really, but because I wanted someone to brag to about the deal I was getting. Plus, Dave is a big guy, played linebacker in high school, so having him there was a nice insurance policy. We got to the Starbucks at 6:50 p.m. We grabbed coffees and waited. 7 p.m. rolled around. No Mark. 7:15. Still nothing. I texted him. "Hey, we're here. Are you close?" He replied instantly. *, so sorry, my truck wouldn't start. I'm at my storage unit waiting for a jump. It's only 10 minutes from where you are. Can you come here? I'll knock $50 off for the gas money. *. Dave looked at the text and shook his head. He said we should bail. He said it sounded sketchy, but I was blinded by greed. That extra $50 off plus the cheap guitar meant I was basically robbing this guy. I told Dave it was just a storage unit, probably one of those big public facilities with cameras and keypad entry. I told Mark we were on our way. He sent the address. It took us away from the main road, past the strip malls, and down into an industrial district that looked completely dead at night. The road turned from pavement to gravel. The streetlights disappeared. We pulled up to the pin drop. It wasn't a nice public facility. It was a row of rusted, corrugated metal sheds behind an abandoned auto body shop. There was a chain-link fence, but the gate was wide open. There were no lights, no cameras, just wind blowing through the weeds and the sound of gravel crunching under our tires. There was one vehicle parked at the far end of the row, a black SUV with tinted windows. I pulled my car up about 50 feet away from it. I kept the engine running, mostly because it was freezing outside. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. I'm in the SUV. Come take a look. It's in the trunk. Dave was gripping the door handle. He told me to keep the car in drive. He said he had a really bad feeling about this. I told him to relax, that I'd just go check it out quickly. I got out of the car. The cold air hit me instantly. The silence out there was heavy. The only sound was my boots crunching on the loose rocks. As I walked toward the black SUV, I tried to peer through the windows, but the tint was illegal dark. You couldn't see a thing inside. When I got about 10 feet away, I noticed something odd. The SUV wasn't running. There was no steam coming from the exhaust pipe. It was 30 degrees out. If he had been sitting in there waiting for a jump, he would have been freezing. I squinted at the windshield. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block the glare from my own headlights behind me. The driver's seat was empty. There was nobody in the passenger seat either. The car was completely empty. I froze. A sudden wave of panic washed over me, that primal instinct that screams predator. My phone buzzed in my hand again. I looked down. Asterisk, why did you stop walking? Come to the trunk. Asterisk. The text came through, but I hadn't seen a phone screen light up inside the SUV. That meant Mark wasn't texting me from inside the car. He was outside, watching me. I spun around. Behind one of the rusted metal sheds, about 20 feet to my left, I saw a shadow detach itself from the wall. It was a man. He was dressed in all black, hood up. He wasn't holding a guitar case. He was holding something long and metallic, a crowbar or a pipe. He didn't run. He just stepped out into the open, blocking the path back to my car. I heard Dave scream my name from the car. I didn't think. I just sprinted. I didn't run back toward the car because the man was in the way. I ran wide, circling around the back of the sheds, scrambling over piles of old tires and scrap metal. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, crunching fast on the gravel. He wasn't saying anything. He wasn't yelling stop or give me your wallet. He was just chasing me in total silence. I looped around the far side of the building and saw my car. Dave had thrown the passenger door open. I dove into the seat, scrambling over the center console as Dave slammed on the gas. As we peeled out, kicking up dust and rocks, I looked in the side mirror. 2 other men stepped out from behind the SUV. They had been hiding on the other side, waiting for me to walk past them so they could box me in. If I had gone to the trunk like the text asked, I would have been surrounded. They weren't selling a guitar. They were hunting. And the scariest part? When I checked the marketplace profile later to report it, the account was gone. But the photo of the guitar? I did a reverse image search. It was taken from an estate sale website, in a completely different state. Story 4, the delivery to nowhere. I drive for one of those food delivery apps to make extra cash for tuition. It's usually pretty chill. Listen to podcasts, drop off burgers, go home. But this happened on a Friday night last November, and it was the last delivery I ever made. It was pouring rain that night, the kind of rain where you can barely see the road markings. I was about to log off, but a high-paying order popped up. It was $80 worth of Chinese food from a nice place downtown. The tip was pre-entered as 0, which usually sucks, but the drop-off note said, asterisk cash tip under the mat. Please do not ring doorbell. Baby sleeping. Bring to side door in the alley. I figured, whatever, cash is king. I picked up the food and drove to the address. It took me to an older part of the city, a neighborhood full of massive Victorian houses that had seen better days. The streetlights were mostly burned out or flickering. The house I pulled up to was dark. Not just everyone is asleep dark, but abandoned dark. No porch light, no light in the upstairs windows. I double-checked the address. This was the place. I grabbed the heavy paper bags, pulled my hood up against the rain, and headed for the alleyway. The note was specific, side door in the alley. The alley ran between the house and a tall wooden fence that separated the property from the neighbors. It was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, and pitch black. I had to use my phone flashlight just to see where I was stepping. The brick wall of the house was on my left, towering over me, and the wet wooden fence was on my right. It felt like walking into a tunnel. I found the side door about halfway down the house. It was an old wooden door with a window in the top half. There was a single, dim yellow bulb buzzing above it, casting just enough light to see the concrete step. I looked down for the mat. There was no mat, just bare, cracked concrete. I sighed. Great. No tip. I figured maybe the wind blew it away, or maybe the customer was just a jerk. I set the food down on the step and pulled out my phone to take the proof of delivery photo. I held my phone up, framing the bags of food against the door. As the camera flash went off, the burst of light illuminated the glass window on the top half of the door. I almost dropped my phone. There was a face pressed against the glass. It was a man. He must have been standing there in the dark kitchen, completely silent, waiting for me. But the way he was standing, it was wrong. His forehead and nose were pressed so hard against the glass that his skin looked white and flattened, like a distorted pig snout. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at him, paralyzed. The flash faded, leaving us back in the dim yellow light of the porch bulb. He wasn't looking at me. That was the worst part. His eyes were wide and unblinking, but they were fixed on a point over my shoulder. He was looking past me, toward the entrance of the alley I had just walked through. And he was smiling, a wide, static grin that didn't move. He didn't open the door to take the food. He didn't wave. Slowly, painfully slowly, he raised one hand. He pointed a single finger. Not at me. He pointed behind me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the alley was so narrow I couldn't just turn around and sprint without tripping. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on the man in the window. That's when I heard it. Behind me, in the darkness of the alley, the metal latch of the wooden fence clicked. It was a soft sound, but in that silence, it sounded like a gunshot. The gate to the neighbor's yard, the one I had walked past to get here, was slowly creaking open. Someone had been waiting in the neighbor's yard. They had waited for me to walk down the narrow alley, waited for me to get trapped between the house and the fence. The man in the window wasn't the threat. He was the distraction, or maybe the signal. I didn't wait to see who was coming out of the gate. I dropped the food and bolted. I couldn't go back the way I came because the gate blocked the path. I sprinted forward, deeper into the alley, hoping it connected to the next street. I was slipping on wet leaves and trash. I heard heavy boots hitting the pavement behind me. Fast. Aggressive. I hit the end of the alley and burst out onto the cross street. I didn't stop. I looped around the block, running in the middle of the road, screaming for help until I got back to my car. I scrambled inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped away, I looked back at the house. The man from the window was now standing outside in the rain, next to the bags of food. And standing next to him was a second figure. They were dressed identically. Dark hoodies, dark jeans. They were just standing there, side by side, watching my taillights fade. I called support to report the incident. They investigated the account. It had been created that night using a stolen credit card. And the house! I looked it up on Zillow the next day. It had been foreclosed on 2 years ago. Nobody lived there. The electricity had been cut off for months, which means that dim yellow light above the side door. They must have wired that up themselves, just to lure me to the exact spot they wanted me. Story 5, the GPS detour. I've driven cross-country 3 times in my life. I know the rules of the road. Stick to the interstate, keep your gas tank at least half full, and never, ever trust a GPS in the mountains. But last November, I broke that third rule, and I honestly believe I almost didn't make it home. I was driving from central Ohio down to the Carolinas to visit family for Thanksgiving. It's a long drive, about 8 hours, and I was cutting through the mountains of West Virginia. It was around 2 a.m. I was exhausted, fueled only by lukewarm gas station coffee and general anxiety. There had been a massive accident on I-77. Traffic was backed up for miles, just a sea of red brake lights sitting in the dark. I was idling there for 20 minutes when my Google Maps popped up with a new gray route. It said, alternate route found. Save 45 minutes. I didn't even think about it. I just wanted to keep moving. I took the next exit. It started fine. It was just a 2-lane state highway paved with painted lines. But then the GPS directed me to turn left onto a road called Old Miners Pike. As soon as I turned, the pavement ended. It turned into a narrow gravel track winding up the side of a mountain. The trees were so thick on either side that they formed a tunnel over the road, blocking out the moon. It was pitch black, the kind of dark where your high beams seem to just get swallowed up by the void. I lost cell service almost immediately. The bars on my phone dropped to no service, but the blue line on the GPS was still there, so I kept going. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, crawling at 15 miles per hour because the gravel was loose and the drop-off on the passenger side was steep. I was starting to regret this shortcut. I hadn't seen a house, a streetlight, or another car since I left the highway. Then I rounded a sharp, blind bend and had to slam on my brakes. There was a tree across the road. It was a massive oak tree, lying perfectly perpendicular across the track, blocking the entire path. I sat there for a second, my heart pounding against my ribs, just staring at the bark in my headlights. Something felt wrong immediately. I'm not an expert, but it didn't look like the tree had fallen naturally. There were no torn roots sticking up. There was no debris or shattered branches on the road. It looked clean. It looked like it had been cut down and dragged there. I put the car in reverse. I didn't care how dangerous it was to back down a mountain road in the dark. My gut was screaming at me to get out of there. I checked my rearview mirror to navigate backward. That's when I saw the headlights. A truck had pulled onto the road behind me. It was sitting about 50 yards back, just around the bend I had just come from. Its lights were off. The only reason I saw it was because my red brake lights were reflecting off its chrome front bumper. It was just sitting there in the dark, watching me. Then the truck's high beams flashed on. They were blindingly bright, probably customized LEDs. They flooded my entire car with white light. I shielded my eyes in the rearview mirror. I expected them to honk. I expected maybe a guy to get out and wave, offering to help move the tree. But nobody got out. The truck just sat there. Then it started to inch forward. I looked back at the tree in front of me. I looked at the ditch on the left side. There was a small gap between the trunk of the fallen tree and the muddy embankment. It was tiny, maybe just enough space for a small sedan if I didn't mind destroying my paint job. The truck behind me revved its engine. It was getting closer. I could see two silhouettes in the cab now. I didn't have a choice. I floored it. I yanked the wheel hard to the left. My car dipped into the muddy ditch, tilting dangerously. I felt the tires spinning in the slush, fighting for traction. I heard the horrible, screeching sound of metal scraping against rock as the undercarriage dragged over the edge of the ditch. I bounced over a massive tree root, my head hitting the roof of the car, and somehow, the car popped up onto the road on the other side of the tree. I didn't look back. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. I sped down that winding gravel road faster than any sane person should drive. I was drifting around corners, kicking up rocks, praying I didn't slide off the cliff edge. About 30 seconds later, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror again. They were chasing me. For 10 minutes, it was a cat-and-mouse game on a mountain cliff. They were in a big pickup truck, so they were faster on the straightaways, gaining on me until their lights filled my entire cabin. But I was in a smaller car with a lower center of gravity, so I could take the sharp corners without braking as hard. Every time I slowed down for a hairpin turn, I could see them right on my bumper. They weren't trying to pass me. They were trying to run me off the road. Finally, the gravel spit me out onto a paved road. I saw a sign for a 24-hour gas station a mile ahead. I laid on the horn, speeding toward the lights of civilization like a maniac. As soon as the gas station canopy came into view, the truck behind me slammed on its brakes. I watched in the mirror as they whipped a violent U-turn in the middle of the road and disappeared back into the dark, heading back up the mountain. When I got to the station, I pulled right up to the front door, shaking so bad I couldn't get my keys out of the ignition. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy. I got out and walked around to the back of my car to check the damage. The entire passenger side was caved in from scraping the tree and the ditch. But that wasn't the part that made me throw up. Stuck in my back bumper, tangled in the plastic molding, was a length of heavy, rusted barbed wire. They hadn't just been chasing me. When we were stopped at the tree, they had pulled up close enough to try and hook my car to theirs. They were going to drag me back up that mountain. And if I hadn't gone into that ditch, they would have had me. #Story 6, the host. I'm a graphic designer, and sometimes when I'm on a deadline, I need total isolation to finish a project. No friends, no distractions. So last January, I rented a small A-frame cabin in Vermont for a week. The listing had hundreds of 5-star reviews. The host, a guy named Elias, was a superhost with a perfect rating. The place looked perfect online. It was small, cozy, just a living room, a kitchen, and a loft bedroom upstairs. But when I arrived and read the welcome book on the kitchen counter, there was one weird rule highlighted in bold text. Asterisk, please do not attempt to open the basement door in the kitchen. It is used for owner storage and remains locked for your safety. Asterisk. Fair enough. I didn't need to go in the basement anyway. By Wednesday, I was deep in my work. It was snowing hard outside, a full blizzard that had buried my car in about 2 feet of powder. Around 10 p.m., I was in the kitchen waiting for the kettle to boil when I heard a noise. It was faint but distinct. A cough. A dry, muffled cough. And it came from behind the locked basement door. I froze, holding the kettle in midair. The house was silent except for the wind howling outside. I told myself it was the pipes. Old houses make weird noises when the heat kicks on, right? I tried to rationalize it. I went back to the living room, but I turned the TV volume down, straining my ears. 20 minutes later, I smelled it. Cigarette smoke. I don't smoke, and the listing was strictly non-smoking. The smell was faint at first, but then it got stronger. It was wafting up from the floor vents near the couch. My heart started racing. I grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen. Stupid, I know, but it made me feel better, and walked over to the basement door. I put my ear against the wood. I heard a voice. It was low, mumbled speech. Unintelligible, like someone muttering to themselves or talking on a phone very quietly. Someone was down there, and they weren't just storing boxes. I pulled out my phone. I didn't want to call 911 yet, because I wasn't 100% sure, and I felt crazy. So I messaged the host, Elias, through the rental app. I wrote, "Hey, is there someone in the basement? I hear noises and I smell smoke." He replied instantly. Asterisk impossible. I'm in Florida for the winter. The basement is empty. It's probably just the furnace acting up. The old heater smells like burning sometimes and makes clanking noises. Asterisk. I looked at the message. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I was just being paranoid and that the voice was just the wind or the boiler. But then I looked at the floor vent again. The smoke wasn't coming from the furnace system. It was drifting up in a thin gray ribbon, like someone was exhaling directly into the ductwork below. I decided to leave. I didn't care about the snow. I didn't care about the money I'd lose. I started packing my bag in the living room, throwing my clothes in haphazardly. As I was zipping up my laptop case, my phone screen lit up. It had automatically synced with my laptop since they were on the same Wi-Fi network. A notification popped up on my screen from AirDrop. iPhone would like to share a photo with you. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The device name sending the photo was Elias's iPhone. He wasn't in Florida. You can only AirDrop if you are within 30 feet of the other person. He was right there. He was directly beneath my feet. I didn't decline the photo. I didn't accept it. I just grabbed my keys and ran for the front door. I left my charger, my toiletries, everything. I ran out into the blizzard, jumped into my car, and locked the doors. My car was buried, and for a terrifying second, the wheels just spun in the deep snow. I rocked it back and forth, slamming from reverse to drive, until the tires finally caught traction on the gravel driveway. As I peeled out onto the main road, I looked back at the cabin. The basement light had been turned on, and through the small, ground-level window that poked out of the snow, I saw him. A man was standing there. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was holding a phone up to the glass, filming me as I drove away. I drove straight to the police station in the next town. When they went back to investigate, they broke the lock on the basement door. They found a mattress, a hot plate, and a wall of monitors. The locked storage wasn't storage. It was his bedroom, and the monitors were hooked up to pinhole cameras hidden inside the smoke detectors in the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom. He hadn't just been down there. He had been watching me the entire time. And if I hadn't smelled that smoke, I don't think he was planning on letting me leave. Story 7, the nice guy. They tell women to be polite. From the time we are little girls, we are taught not to be rude, not to make a scene, and to always give people the benefit of the doubt. That advice almost got me killed last year. I moved into my first solo apartment in September. It was a decent building on the north side of the city. It had a secure entry with a key fob and cameras in the lobby, so I felt safe. My apartment was on the top floor, unit 404. The day I moved in, my neighbor across the hall introduced himself. His name was Greg. He was older, maybe late 40s, balding, and always wore these knitted sweater vests. He seemed completely harmless. He even brought me a small potted plant as a welcome gift. He smiled and said that if I ever needed anything, sugar, a hammer, someone to carry groceries, he was right there. It started with small things. I'd come home from work and find a note slid under my door. It would say something like, "Saw you get home late last night. Make sure to lock the deadbolt." Or, "You look nice in that blue coat." It was creepy, sure, but I brushed it off. I told myself he was just a lonely older guy trying to be friendly. I didn't want to be the mean girl in the building. So, whenever I saw him in the hallway, I'd just smile tight-lipped and say thanks, then rush into my apartment. Then things escalated. I'd be sitting in my living room watching Netflix at night, and I would hear a sound at my front door. It was a soft, rhythmic scratching, like someone dragging their fingernails lightly down the wood grain. I'd mute the TV and creep over to the peephole. But every time I looked out, the hallway was empty. I figured maybe it was a draft, or maybe the building's settling. But deep down, I knew that sound. It was deliberate. One night in November, I came home from a friend's birthday party around 2 a.m. I was a little tipsy, fumbling with my keys in the hallway, when Greg's door opened. He didn't turn on his lights. He just stood there in the dark of his apartment, illuminated only by the hallway fluorescence. He was just staring at me. He said, "You're home late." He wasn't smiling this time. His face was blank. I laughed nervously and finally got my key in the lock. I said, "Yeah, just hanging out with some friends." He took a step out into the hallway. He asked, "Which friends? The guy with the red hat? Or the tall one?" I froze. My blood turned into ice water. I hadn't told him where I was going. And those friends he mentioned? They hadn't come to the apartment building. I had met them at a bar downtown, 3 miles away. The only way he could know about the guy in the red hat is if he had followed me. I didn't answer him. I slammed my door shut, threw the deadbolt, locked the chain, and backed away. I went straight to my bedroom and sat on the bed, shaking. I decided right then that I was breaking my lease. I was going to call the leasing office first thing in the morning and tell them everything. I took my shoes off and laid back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm my breathing. The apartment was dead quiet. And then, I heard it. It was a quiet, rhythmic squeak, like bed springs compressing. But I wasn't moving, and it wasn't coming from my bed. It was coming from above me. I lay there, paralyzed. I was on the top floor. There was no apartment above me. There was just a maintenance crawl space and the roof. I slowly stood up on my mattress so I could get a closer look at the air vent cover in the ceiling. It was right above my bed. The screws on the vent cover were loose. They were hanging down by a thread. And inside the darkness of the ductwork, I saw a glint. A wet reflection. Someone was lying in the crawl space, looking directly down at me. Then, a voice whispered from the vent. It was Greg's voice. He whispered, "I can see you." I screamed. I didn't grab my shoes. I didn't grab my coat. I grabbed my phone and ran into the bathroom, locking the door and curling up in the bathtub. As I dialed 911, I could hear him scrambling above the ceiling tiles. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was moving fast, crawling over the drywall toward the bathroom vent. The police got there in 4 minutes. They kicked down my front door. They found a maintenance hatch in the hallway closet, the one right outside my apartment, that had been pried open. Greg had rigged a sleeping bag up there in the crawl space. He had a flashlight, a bottle of water, and a drill. He had drilled small holes looking down into my bedroom, my living room, and even my shower. The scratching at my door hadn't been him trying to break in. It was him testing the locks to see if I was home, so he would know when it was safe to climb down from the ceiling while I was gone. He had been in my apartment dozens of times. The police found photos on his phone of me sleeping, photos taken from inside my room. So ladies, listen to your gut. Be rude. Be loud. Make a scene. Because the nice guy across the hall might be the most dangerous monster you'll ever meet. Story 8, The Whistling. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I've been camping since I was a kid. I know the woods. I know what bears sound like. I know what cougars sound like. And I know that the forest is never truly quiet. There is always wind in the pines, crickets, frogs, the sound of water. If the woods go silent, it means a predator is near. It's nature's alarm system. I was on a solo trip in the Olympic Peninsula, miles off the main trail. I wanted to get away from the crowds and clear my head. I had hiked in about 6 miles to a spot near a small river valley. It was beautiful. Tall ancient pines, thick ferns, total isolation. I set up my camp, ate dinner, and hung my bear bag. By 10 p.m., I was in my tent, reading a book by the light of my headlamp. Then the silence hit. It was instant. 1 second, the frogs were croaking and the wind was rustling the leaves. The next second, nothing. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the valley. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I put my book down. I sat up, listening. My skin was prickling. I reached for the knife I keep in my boot. And then I heard it, whistling. It wasn't a bird. It was a clear, melodic, human whistle. And it was a tune I recognized. It was the theme song to that old sitcom, The Andy Griffith Show. A happy, upbeat little tune. But it was coming from the other side of the river, deep in the dense brush, maybe 50 yards away. "Hello," I called out. The whistling stopped immediately. I waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm camping here," I yelled, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "Just letting you know. I have a weapon." Nothing. No footsteps. No response. Just that dead, heavy silence. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and unzipped the tent mesh. I stepped out into the clearing. I shone the beam across the river. The water reflected the light, but the trees on the other side were a wall of black. I scanned the tree line, left to right. Then I saw it. About 7 feet off the ground, caught in the edge of my beam, were 2 eyes. They reflected the light like a cat or a deer, glowing yellow-green. But they were spaced wrong. They were too far apart to be a bear, too far apart to be a cougar, and they were staring right at me. "Hey!" I shouted, waving the light. The eyes blinked, and then the whistling started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from across the river. It was coming from above me. I threw myself backward, tripping over my own fire ring, and scrambled away from the trees. I shone the light up into the canopy directly over where my tent was pitched. Whatever it was fast. I saw a pale, long limb snap back behind a thick pine branch. It looked like human skin, but hairless. And the way it moved, it was fluid, like liquid. I didn't pack my gear. I didn't take my tent. I didn't even put out the fire. I just ran. I ran blindly into the dark, away from the river, using my flashlight to dodge trees. I was tearing through thorn bushes, tripping over roots, sprinting toward the logging road I had hiked in on. Behind me, I could hear it moving through the canopy. It wasn't touching the ground. I could hear heavy branches snapping and leaves rustling high above my head. It was following me from the trees. It was keeping pace with me perfectly. And the whole time it was whistling. That same happy, upbeat sitcom tune. But it was changing. The pitch was getting lower, slower, distorted, like a record player running out of batteries. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until I couldn't feel my legs. I eventually hit the main logging road, and I didn't stop until I saw the headlights of a ranger truck patrolling the area at 4 a.m. I flagged him down, waving my arms like a maniac. I was covered in scratches, bleeding, half frozen. I told the ranger there was a bear stalking me. I didn't tell him about the whistling. I knew he wouldn't believe me. He drove me back to my car at the trailhead. But here's the thing that made me stop camping forever. The thing that makes me lock my windows at night, even though I live in the city now. A few weeks after that trip, I was looking up the area online. I found a forum post from a missing persons page. A guy had gone missing in that exact river valley 2 years ago. They never found a body, just his tent ripped to shreds. I found his YouTube channel. He was a vlogger who made solo camping videos. I clicked on his last video. It was a vlog from the day he disappeared. He was hiking into the woods, filming himself with a selfie stick, talking about how beautiful the river was. And in the intro to the video, he was whistling. He was whistling the theme song to the Andy Griffith Show. That thing in the woods, it wasn't just watching. It was mimicking. It ate him, and it learned his song. And now it knows my voice too. So to anyone hiking in the Olympic Peninsula, if the woods go quiet and you hear a happy little whistle in the dark, don't look up, just run.